I was heading home after a long, tough day at work. It was already late, almost 11 at night, and I was exhausted, my eyes heavy with sleep. The road was long and pretty deserted, just the sound of the engine and the wind coming through the half-open window. I just wanted to get home, take a shower, and crash into bed. The night was pitch dark. You couldn't even see the moon properly. The headlights only illuminated a short distance ahead, and the rest was just darkness. The trees on both sides of the road were swaying with the wind, and every now and then, the headlights would catch branches that looked like outstretched hands. I hadn't seen another car on the road for a while, and the silence was starting to make me uneasy. That's when I saw him. A man standing on the shoulder of the road. He looked like he was about 60 with gray hair, wearing a black suit that had seen better days. He had a big black suitcase next to him and was waving his hand. He seemed like he'd been there for a while, looking a bit lost. I thought about driving straight past, but I don't know, something made me stop. Maybe it was the guilt of leaving an older guy out there in the middle of nowhere. I rolled down the window and asked where he was going. He replied in a raspy voice that he needed a ride to the junction just up ahead. I knew where it was. It wasn't far, so I figured it wouldn't hurt to help. He opened the door and got in, tossing the suitcase onto the back seat with a heavy thud that made me glance at it in the rearview mirror. It seemed heavy. We drove along the road, but the atmosphere got weird. The guy sat up straight, staring out the front window, not moving a muscle. The silence in the car was almost unbearable. I tried to make conversation, asking where he was coming from, where he was headed, stuff like that, but he only answered in short sentences, without giving any details. And then there was that smell. A metallic smell, kind of strong. I thought it might be some problem with the car, but the feeling of discomfort wouldn't go away. The ride seemed longer than usual, and I started to get impatient. Finally, after a while, we reached the junction. He looked at me and said he could get out there. I pulled over to the shoulder, and he got out slowly, picking up the suitcase carefully. Before closing the door, he gave me a strange look and thanked me, with a smile that didn't quite match the situation. As soon as he got out, I started the car and drove away as fast as I could. I just wanted to get home and forget about this strange night. When I finally parked in the garage, I still felt uneasy. I thought about everything that had happened, but shook my head, trying to push those thoughts away. I got out of the car and went to open the trunk to grab some stuff I had left there. When I opened it, the shock was instant. There were blood stains, fresh, dripping across the trunk's carpet. My heart started racing. I knew that wasn't there before. I stood there, staring at those stains, trying to figure out where they had come from. I could only think of the suitcase the man had been carrying and the strange smell I noticed during the ride. I slammed the trunk shut, the sound echoing in the empty garage. I looked around as if expecting to see someone, but of course, there was no one there. I went back to the car, trying to think clearly, but my mind was racing. Who was that man? What was in that suitcase? Why was there blood in my car? I grabbed the hose and all the cleaning supplies I could find and started scrubbing the car's trunk. Those blood stains were really tough to clean. After an hour of hard work, I finally finished. I was exhausted, both from the long drive and from having to wash the car at that hour of the night. I went inside, locked the door, but couldn't relax. I sat on the couch for hours, trying to put the pieces together, but nothing made sense. Deep down, I knew that feeling of danger wasn't going away anytime soon. And even today, every time I take the car for a long drive at night, I remember his look and the way he smiled before getting out. Something tells me I'll never really know what happened that night.
I had been driving for about 4 hours straight. The journey was long, and I needed to get to my parents' house, who live in the countryside, before it got too late. The road was practically deserted, just my car and a suffocating silence. The radio was off, and all I could hear was the monotonous sound of the engine and the wind hitting the car's body. The sky was covered in dark clouds, no moon, no stars. The darkness seemed to swallow everything around me. It was already past 11 at night, and the fatigue was starting to kick in. As I drove, my eyes scanned the road ahead, trying to stay focused. The headlights lit up the road and a bit of the trees around, which swayed slightly with the wind. Then, out of nowhere, I saw a group of people standing on the shoulder of the road. It was a family, a father, mother, and 2 kids. They were there, standing by the side of the road, like they were waiting for someone. I don't know why, but I slowed down. Maybe it was the fatigue, or maybe the guilt of leaving a family in the middle of nowhere. When I got closer, they started waving at me, asking for a ride. I hesitated. My instinct told me to keep driving, but I ended up stopping the car. I rolled down the window and asked what had happened. The father, a man in his 40s, tall with a short beard, smiled at me. He looked tired, with deep-set eyes, as if he hadn't slept in days. "Good evening, my friend. We need a ride to the next village, if it's not too much trouble," he said, in a calm but somewhat weary voice. I looked at the 2 kids, a boy and a girl, both around 8 or 10 years old. They looked a bit dirty, like they'd been walking for a while. The mother stood beside them, looking worried, holding a worn leather bag. The wind made a strange noise in the trees, a whistle that almost sounded like a whisper, and it gave me chills. "Sure, I can take you there," I replied, trying to sound friendly. It wouldn't cost me anything, and at least I'd have some company on the road. They got in the car, settling in as best as they could. The father sat in the passenger seat, the mother and the kids squeezed into the back. The woman seemed nervous, clutching the bag tightly, while the kids' eyes wouldn't leave me in the rearview mirror. The air got a bit heavier, a smell of damp earth and sweat filled the car. We continued on, and the father started making small talk, asking where I was from, where I was headed. He spoke with a calmness that contrasted with the tense atmosphere inside the car. I responded politely, but something in his voice made me uneasy. The road seemed even longer now, the asphalt gleaming under the headlights, and the silence between words made everything feel even stranger. After about 10 minutes of silence, the father pulled out a book from the woman's bag. An old book, with a black cover, frayed at the edges. He started flipping through it slowly, stopping at a specific page. I glanced at him out of the corner of my eye, curious. Suddenly, he began to say some words I couldn't understand. They sounded like they were in another language, something I had never heard before. It was a low voice, almost like a whisper, but clear enough to make me uncomfortable. Soon, the mother and the children started repeating the words along with him, in a strange rhythm, like some kind of chant. My stomach tightened. What was that? A prayer? A ritual? I tried to focus on the road, but their sound seemed to fill the whole car. I began to sweat cold, my hands gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. Those words. It was like they were echoing inside my head. I looked in the rearview mirror and saw the kids, with their eyes closed, murmuring the same words, in sync with the father. The mother had a fixed, glazed look, but her mouth didn't stop moving. I didn't understand what was happening, but I knew I didn't like it. After what felt like hours, the father closed the book with a loud snap that made me jump a little in my seat. He looked at me with that same calm smile and thanked me for the ride. He said they would get off there, near an entrance to a small village that was barely visible from the road. We'll get off here, he said, pointing to a spot that looked like just another dark entrance between the trees. Thank you very much for your kindness. But before you go, I'd like to invite you to spend the night at our house. It's late, and it's not safe to travel alone. A chill ran down my spine. The way he spoke, so polite, but with that smile. It seemed like a normal invitation, but something inside me was screaming for me to say no. The mother and the kids were looking at me with that same strange expression, waiting for my answer. Thank you very much, but I think it's better if I keep going. I still have a way to go, I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. The father shrugged, still smiling. "All right, I understand. Have a safe journey, then." They got out of the car, and I started the engine without looking back. I accelerated a bit more than I should have, my heart pounding in my chest. When I looked in the rearview mirror, I couldn't see the family anymore. The darkness had swallowed them. Only the sound of those strange words still seemed to echo in my head. After that night, I could never forget their faces and those words. Even today, when I remember, I feel the same chill. And every time I drive down that road, I can't help but think about the strange family I met. Something tells me I made the right choice by not accepting that invitation, but part of me always wonders what would have happened if I had.
I had been on the road for over 6 hours. The truck engine was roaring loudly, and the monotonous sound of the wheels on the asphalt was starting to make me feel a bit dizzy. It was one of those hot summer mornings, the sun already high in the sky, burning the back of my neck, and the road seemed like an endless desert, without a shadow, without a curve to break the monotony. The air conditioning couldn't keep up, and the heat inside the cab felt like a furnace. My eyes were heavy, and I knew I needed to stop soon at the next gas station to rest. The road was almost empty, I only saw a car every now and then, and I was driving with that feeling of loneliness that only those who spend a lot of time behind the wheel know. That's when, in the middle of that scorching heat, I saw a woman and a child on the shoulder, under the blazing sun. She was waving, trying to get my attention. The woman looked like she was in her 30s, with light brown hair tied in a ponytail, wearing a white blouse and a long skirt, yellowed with time, almost transparent because it was so thin. The child, a girl about 6 or 7 years old, was holding her hand tightly. The little girl was wearing a floral dress, somewhat faded, and had a lost look, as if she were tired or scared. I slowed down and pulled over, not really sure why. Maybe it was the blazing sun that made me feel sorry for them, or maybe it was just the idea of helping someone who seemed to be in need. I stopped the truck beside them, rolled down the window, and asked what was going on. "We missed the bus. We need to get to the next town. Could you give us a ride?" the woman said with a soft, but somewhat hurried voice. She seemed tired, her face sweaty, her eyes a bit anxious. I looked at the road and then back at them. I didn't see anyone else around. I sighed and replied, "Look, I'm only going as far as the next gas station, not far from here. If that helps, you can come with me up to there." She gave a smile, looking relieved. "Oh, that helps a lot. Thank you so much." The woman opened the door and climbed into the cab, pulling the girl by the hand. The girl got in behind her, without saying a word, and sat next to her mother, very quietly. As soon as they settled in, I got back on the road. The silence in the cab was uncomfortable. I tried to make conversation, but the woman only answered with short sentences, seeming nervous. The girl said nothing, just stared ahead with a fixed, almost hypnotized look. I glanced in the rearview mirror a few times, trying to understand that expression, but she kept her eyes fixed on the road, not blinking. "And where were you headed?" I asked, trying to ease the tension. "We need to get to the next town, we have family there," she replied, without going into detail, which only made me more curious. As I drove, I felt a strange chill, an uneasiness, but I ignored it. The sun kept beating down, and the heat was unbearable. I gripped the steering wheel harder than usual, maybe trying to stay calm. The smell of dust and sweat filled the cab, mixed with a soft perfume, something floral, but old, like those perfumes you find in old drawers. Finally, after about 20 minutes of heavy silence, we arrived at the gas station. It was a simple place, with 2 old pumps, a little shop, and a small diner. I parked the truck and turned off the engine. "Well, this is where I stop. I hope you can find a ride to continue your journey," I said, looking at them. The woman smiled again, that same strange smile, as if she knew something I didn't. She thanked me and got out of the truck, pulling the girl by the hand. "Thanks for the ride," she said before walking away. I watched them walk away until they disappeared around the station. The place was kind of empty, just a few truck drivers having coffee and chatting in the diner. I went in to get a coffee and heard a group of drivers talking at a table. "Yeah, my delivery is in the next town, I'll hit the road soon," one of them commented. My curiosity made me interrupt. "Sorry to interrupt, but I just gave a ride to a woman and her daughter. They were on the road, missed their bus, and needed to get to the next town. Could you give them a lift to the next town?" The men exchanged looks, and one of them laughed, a bit nervously. "So, you saw them too, huh? Everyone here knows those two. They died in a car accident years ago, trying to get to that town. Since then, every now and then, they appear on the road asking for a ride." My heart started pounding. I looked around, hoping it was some sort of bad joke. One of them noticed my incredulous expression and added, "No one believes it until they see it with their own eyes. I've seen them 3 times already. It's always the same story, they ask for a ride and then disappear at the station or in the town. No one knows how or why, but that's how it is." Still incredulous, I left the diner and went to ask other people outside. Everyone knew the story about the woman and the girl. A strange sensation took over me, a chill that made my stomach turn. I got back to the truck, trying to process what I had heard. I looked in the rearview mirror, as if expecting to see something, but all I saw was my own reflection, pale and frightened. I sped out of there as fast as I could. To this day, I don't know if it was a joke or if I really gave a ride to someone who shouldn't be here anymore. But one thing is for sure, since that day, I avoid that road. Because I never want to feel what I felt that morning again.
I was heading home after a long day at work. It was already late, and the weather had suddenly taken a turn. The rain was pouring down heavily, and the windshield wipers could barely keep up with all the water. The raindrops were hitting the glass hard, and the sound of the rain mixed with the engine's rumble created a somewhat unsettling soundtrack for that dark night. The road was almost deserted, the wet asphalt shining, reflecting the headlights like a mirror. I was driving slowly, trying to see as much as I could through that curtain of water. All I wanted was to get home quickly, take off my wet shoes, and rest. That's when I saw someone. A figure appeared at the side of the road, a tall guy, standing under one of those old bus shelters. He was soaked, hunched over, like he'd been there for a while, trying to find some protection from the rain. My first instinct was to keep driving, but something made me hit the brakes. Maybe it was the desperate look he gave me, or maybe it was the thought of leaving someone out there in the rain. I don't know. I pulled over and opened the window a little, just enough to keep the rain out. "Need a ride?" I asked, almost shouting over the sound of the rain. He approached quickly, looking relieved. He seemed to be in his 30s, with short hair, a scruffy beard, and he was completely drenched. He nodded and thanked me, his voice trembling, like he was freezing. "Yes, please. I need to get to the city." "Anywhere near there would help," he said. I opened the passenger door, and he got in, slamming it shut. As soon as he sat down, a smell of wet earth and something slightly sour filled the car. He settled into the seat and let out a sigh, his shoulders drooping, clearly relieved to be out of the rain. I started the car and got back on the road, trying to keep my focus. The rain was pounding hard on the windshield, and the atmosphere inside the car felt even stranger. I glanced at him out of the corner of my eye. He was soaked, his leather jacket dripping onto the car's floor mat, and he was staring straight ahead, like he was lost in thought. "So, man, have you been waiting long?" I asked, just to break the silence. He slowly turned his head toward me, as if my voice had pulled him out of a trance. "Yes, a long time," he replied in a strange, almost mechanical tone. His answer made me feel a bit uneasy, but I kept driving. The road seemed to stretch out as time passed, the rain was relentless, and the wind gently rocked the car. After a while, I noticed the guy wasn't taking his eyes off the road. He didn't blink, just kept staring at the asphalt ahead. "So, where exactly are you headed?" I tried asking again. He took a few seconds to answer, as if he was thinking about his response. "I need to find someone. In the city." "Oh, I see," I said, trying to hide my discomfort. The silence returned to the car. I was starting to feel uneasy. That weird smell seemed to be getting stronger. Then, I glanced in the rearview mirror and saw something that made my blood run cold. The back windows of the car were completely fogged up, as if someone had been breathing there. Heavy breaths, drawing small circles of vapor on the glass. I looked back at the passenger, who continued to stare at the road. My fingers tightened around the steering wheel. My mind started racing, trying to find a logical explanation for it, but nothing made sense. I swallowed hard and kept driving. Suddenly, he turned to me out of nowhere and spoke in a calm but serious voice. "Do you believe in ghosts?" I almost lost control of the car. My breathing quickened, and my heart started racing. I tried to laugh, but my voice came out shaky. "Well, I've never seen one, so." He kept looking at me, that fixed, almost hypnotic stare. "Maybe you're seeing one now," he said, without changing his expression. I felt a shiver run down my spine. I looked again in the rearview mirror, and now there were handprints, as if someone had pressed their palms against the foggy glass. I quickly turned to look at the back seat, but no one was there. When I turned my eyes back to the front, the guy was smiling, but it wasn't a friendly smile. It was a strange, cold smile. My heart was pounding, and the sound of the rain seemed to grow louder, deafening. Without thinking twice, I swerved the wheel and pulled over to the side of the road. I turned to him and said, "Look, I think you can get out here, we're close to the city." He didn't say anything, he just kept smiling. He slowly opened the door and stepped out into the rain, without looking back. As soon as he closed the door, the strange smell disappeared, and the windows stopped fogging up. I hit the gas as fast as I could, not looking in the rearview mirror. I just wanted to get out of there. I got home later, still feeling my heart pounding in my chest. To this day, I don't know what happened that night. But one thing is for sure, every time I see someone hitchhiking on the road, I remember his smile and keep driving, without looking back.